good to be in Naples. It's a beautiful part of the country. Unfortunately, I'm only going to be here for a few hours. Not only does it give me an opportunity to be able to address all of you, but fortunately my parents have a place on Sanibel Island, so I actually get to see them for a few minutes to and from the airport as well. I started this morning in Palm Beach by addressing the leadership for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and then came across Alligator Alley to be with you here this afternoon and then head back to Washington this afternoon. And the session that I'm supposed to be part of, this segment of the program, is about reinventing. Well, you have to keep in mind that I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and as Ronald Reagan said, Washington is an island surrounded by a sea of reality. And there's a lot of truth to that. But for the record, I live in Mount Vernon, Virginia, which is outside the Beltway in the real world. But when somebody asked me to speak today about reinvent and a topic that was relevant to that, I decided first to go to Webster's Dictionary, because I found that in Washington, D.C., that words that are used there don't necessarily mean the same as Webster's Dictionary. And I'll give you two examples. Trust funds. You can't trust them, they're not funded. Cuts. When a politician tells you they're going to cut something, they mean that they're reducing the rate of increase, not that there's actually a real reduction in what they're doing, whether that be taxes or spending or anything else. And quite frankly, the reason that politicians have such a bad reputation is because the American people are a lot smarter than they give them credit for, and they know that the words that they use do not ring true. And so I'm going to go with the word, rather than the word reinvent, because reinvent means to remake or redo completely. I'm going to go with the word transform, which means to change in composition or structure. And what is my topic? The United States federal government. The U.S. federal government has grown far beyond the intentions of our nation's founders. At the outset of our nation, the federal government represented 2% of the economy. This year, it will represent over 25% of the economy, in part because of the recession, extraordinary government efforts, but it is growing to much higher than that in the future on our current path, absent transformational reforms. In the beginning of our republic in 1789, 100% of so-called discretionary spending, that spending that Congress has control over, related to express and enumerated responsibilities envisioned by the Founding Fathers for the federal government. This year, less than 40% of the federal budget relates to those express and enumerated responsibilities. And that 40%, less than 40%, is getting squeezed because of programs that are on autopilot. For almost 200 years, this nation did not run deficits and accumulate debt burdens unless we were at war, and I'm talking about a declared war, which is what the Constitution calls for by the Congress, unless we were in a depression or recession or faced some major national emergency. But today, all too many politicians believe that it's acceptable to run deficits of about 3% of the economy, whether it's in peacetime, whether we are growing or not, whether we face any national emergencies. And so as a result, when we're in a recession, when we have unprecedented non-business cycle challenges, when we're at war, or we have other challenges such as high unemployment, deficits skyrocket. And last year, they were 10% of the economy. This year, they're expected to be 11% of the economy. And next year, they're expected to be about 10% of the economy again. To win our nation's independence and to gain ratification of the greatest political document in the history of mankind, the United States Constitution, the federal government had debt equal to 40% of the economy. I would say we got something for that 40% of the economy: our independence, a new nation, and ratification of the greatest political document in the history of mankind. But at the end of this fiscal year, when you count total debt, not just debt held by the public, but debt owed to the so-called trust funds, we will be at 90% of the economy, and within a little over a year, we'll be at 100% of the economy and climbing. And I ask you, what are we getting for this debt? Federal spending, net of inflation, has grown 400% in the last 40 years. That's after inflation. So the government is over 4 times as big with regard to spending than it was 40 years ago. Deficits have skyrocketed, and debt has doubled over the past 10 years. And it's likely to double again in the next 10 years unless we start making tough choices soon. And yes, we need to engage in a number of transformational reforms dealing with policy, operational, and political issues. We must keep the following in mind when you're dealing with spending, especially by the federal government. Spending money you don't have on a recurring basis is irresponsible. Spending somebody else's money that you don't have is unethical and a fiduciary breach if you're a fiduciary. Spending somebody else's money irresponsibly, who's too young to vote and not born yet, is immoral. And that is exactly what's going on right now. We have massive taxation without representation because the people who are going to get the bill are disproportionately people who are too young to vote and not born yet. I'm not concerned about myself. I'm not as concerned for my children. I'm very concerned for my 3 grandchildren, 8, 7, and 3 years old. We have also become incredibly dependent on foreign lenders. We've gone from the world's largest creditor nation to the world's largest debtor nation. And about 50% of all of our public debt is now held by foreign lenders. Yes, America is being mortgaged, and increasingly that mortgage is held by foreign lenders. That is not in our nation's longer-term economic, foreign policy, national security, and even domestic tranquility's interest. Most importantly, beyond these numbers, we face tens of trillions of dollars of unfunded obligations for Medicare, Social Security, and other commitments that could swamp our ship of state. Medicare alone is underfunded $38 trillion and growing by at least $2 trillion a year by doing nothing. While the numbers are disturbing and tough to comprehend, the real problem is that this country has strayed from the basic principles and values under which it was founded and which made it great. Principles like liberty, opportunity, savings, thrift, limited government, and stewardship. And what is stewardship? Stewardship means that as a leader, no matter what sector of the economy you're in, your job is not just to generate positive results today. It's not just to leave things better off when you leave your job or this earth than when you came. It's to leave things better positioned for the future. And for the first time in the history of the United States, average income, average education level, and average health status is going down. And for the first time in the history of the United States, a significant majority of Americans believe that life for their children and grandchildren will not be as good as theirs. That is not acceptable. That is downright un-American. We need to make tough, transformational choices. We need to return to the basic principles and values in order to stay great, in order to help ensure that our future will be better than our past. And to do so, we're going to have to engage in a range of policy, operational, and political reforms. We must determine what needs to be done and how are we going to get it done given our dysfunctional democracy. And I will come back to that. Our first step must be to take a step to make sure that we don't lose the confidence of our foreign lenders. because the four factors that led to the mortgage-related subprime crisis exist for the federal government's own finances. And if we pass a tipping point and lose the confidence of our foreign lenders, then interest rates will go up dramatically, there'll be a dramatic decline in the dollar, and that will lead to something that will be much worse than a recession. We must, and I hope that we will avoid it, but to do it, we have to recognize that Washington can't make progress dealing with one challenging issue at a time, health care, energy, much less make progress on multiple fronts simultaneously, which is what we're going to have to do in order to help ensure that we do not lose the confidence of our foreign lenders. And what I mean, President Obama has announced the creation of a Fiscal Responsibility and Reform Commission that at a minimum must engage the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, help them understand that the government has overpromised and underdelivered for too long, that we need to make tough choices sooner rather than later, the benefits of doing so, the potential adverse consequences to our country and our families if we do not. And we must reimpose tough statutory budget controls, like the ones that existed but expired in 2002 once we turn the corner on the economy and get unemployment down. We must reform Social Security to make it solvent, sustainable, secure, and more savings-oriented. It's not that tough. We must engage in round one of health care reform that makes as a priority to reduce health care costs, because that's the one thing that could bankrupt America, and that ultimately moves towards trying to achieve over time some level of universal coverage that's appropriate, affordable, and sustainable, dramatically changes our payment systems, helps to improve quality, and enhances personal responsibility for our own health and wellness. We must engage in round one of comprehensive tax reform that will make our system simpler, fair, more competitive, more administratable, and more enforceable. That means broadening the base of taxation to keep rates as low as possible. That means probably exploring ways to try to encourage savings and investment through alternatives such as progressive consumption taxes, such as a value-added tax. But we should not send another dime to Washington unless and until there are tough statutory budget controls in place, and unless and until there's round one of social insurance reforms and serious spending reprioritization and constraint. Why? Because if you do, it will be wasted. This year, 42 cents of every dollar that is spent by Washington is borrowed, primarily from foreign lenders. You cannot continue to do that on a recurring basis without having serious adverse consequences over time. So step one, achieve progress on those four fronts within the next couple of years. Step two, we need to engage in a fundamental review of the entire base of the federal government in installments over years. The major spending programs, the major tax preferences, the major departments and agencies, because many of them are outdated, duplicative, and just downright ineffective. Believe it or not, while we've been in existence since 1789 as a nation, we've never had a strategic framework, and we still don't have national outcome-based indicators, economic, safety, security, social, environmental, to understand how are we doing, are we getting better or worse, and how do we compare to our competitor nations. And when you do that, you find some shocking things. This country spends double per person on health care with below average outcomes. This country spends double per person on K through 12 education with below average outcomes. This country doesn't do as much in basic research with critical infrastructure, and these are all leading indicators to having a more positive future. And finally, after we end up engaging in round one of policy reforms and this comprehensive effort to relook at government to make sure that it's future-focused and results-oriented, we have to engage in political reforms because we have a dysfunctional democracy. We have something the founders never intended. A disproportionate number of our elected representatives don't come from the real world. They go to the la-la land of the East, Washington, and they want to stay there for the rest of their days. They view their position. They view their position as a job, and they want to make a career out of it, which means they don't state the facts, speak the truth. They don't want to make tough choices because it might threaten their job security. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you that have seen the film Thelma and Louise will know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you should. We are headed for a fiscal cliff. We must change course. Don't let the Cadillac go over the cliff. We have to turn, and we have to do it before our foreign lenders lose confidence. Political reforms like changing how we redistrict, changing campaign finance rules, and yes, term limits at some reasonable level so that people can be a career politician if they want, but they can't stay in the same job year after year after year. Yes, we can take steps to help transform the government, to renew America, and to keep the American dream alive. But to do so, the first three words of the Constitution have to come alive. We the people. We the people must become more informed and involved. We must hold people accountable for what they do and what they fail to do. And if they do the right thing, reward them. And if they do the wrong thing, kick them out. And I don't care if they're a Democrat, Republican, or independent. It's irrelevant. We owe our founding fathers and our families no less. I'll do my part. I hope that you do yours. And if you want specific solutions, then I would encourage you to go and purchase Come Back America, Turning the Country Around and Restoring Fiscal Responsibility. And in the interest of full and fair disclosure, I'm the author, but all the proceeds go to the foundation. Thank you very much.